Tonight we're in conversation with Fields Harrington.
Hi, everybody.
So yeah, I wanted to I guess like just go like straight into it and ask if you could elaborate on the name Fields Harrington. How did you come up with that name? What's the story
Um,
behind
yeah, I mean, Fields is my middle name, and Harrington's my last name. I just don't go by my first name, which is Brian. My full name is Brian Fields Harrington Jr. Um, and I stopped going by my first name kind of later in
that?
life, like probably around my 20s. Um, Not for a particular reason, just was, I think, going through some growing changes or growth changes. I don't know. I just remember just not being able to identify with Brian anymore and just wanted to go by Fields. And also, like, my grandmother is the one who came up with Fields for my father. And
Hmm.
um, I've asked like people in the family, like, yo, what's Fields about? Like, where did she get it from? Because she had already passed when I was curious about my middle name, and so I asked people in the family, and some people were just like, oh, she just thought it was like a pretty name, and some people was like, I don't know. So I've kind of like that kind of origin story behind it too. Like, I can't really find out where Fields came from and what she was thinking. So it seems like I should continue to go by it, just out of that respect.
Yeah, that's cool. I had like my own I guess like assumption about the name Fields Harrington.
Oh yeah, what was it?
I was like, maybe this is like a part of the art, and
Oh yeah.
yeah, like fields relating to plantations, and then our last names being tied to plantations, so maybe it being kind of like a play on that or like an emphasis on that.
It's interesting. No one's ever told me that before, but
Really?
yeah,
Okay.
no one's ever been like, "Yo, is Fields from that?" And then yeah, you're the first person to actually say it out loud. Yeah,
Hey, it could be a way to spin it, but now like it's gonna be broadcasted live, so
it's too late. It's too late.
no, no, actually that was just like that was all staged. Staged that is actually what you meant. We just like made a joke out of it. So I guess like I want to get into like some of your work specifically.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So Black Technology, first of all, I have to say thank you. Black Secret Technology. Thanks for putting me onto that album, Black Techno Jungle Beats, by a guy called Gerald.
Yeah.
Such a good album. Can you elaborate on Black Secret Technology and what that means to you and how does it relate to your work?
Yeah, that album by a guy called Gerald, Black Secret Technology, was it's an album I've recently was introduced to by one of my previous faculty um,
Cool.
at the University of Pennsylvania, David Hart. Um, yeah, I
Okay.
think we were like, maybe working in his studio, and like he put the album on. I was like, what is this? It's like from,
Jungle Beats.
I mean, it was, and I guess like, the album is amazing, and it's like super important to even what you hear some musicians and DJs producing today.
Totally.
And But I was really, kind of pulled in by the title, and I was like, what is Black Secret Technology exactly? Like, Black Secret Technology feels like and like a coded system in some way, or um, a system that needs to be decoded at least. Another uh, way I applied it to my practice was to look at a history of invention by Black men and women across time, and that study was specifically to like kind of, situate myself in this space of science and physics that I was, um, stepping into. I was trying to, um, you know, process how am I thinking about science, how am I thinking about physics, how am I thinking about these technologies, and I looked, towards this history of invention and thinking about like how invention is put into existence and why and what time, and also who did it, because I don't know a lot of inventors like mostly everybody else, um,
Right.
for everyday objects that we use. Like I don't know who invented like a lot of different things,
Which
and
is strange, like why don't we know this? Why don't we celebrate people that make the things that we use and know more about them and their implications,
yeah,
behind devices.
we are taught certain inventors in school. Thomas Edison, of course. Like it's like you're taught that person, but you're not taught about Benjamin Banneker, or you're not taught about Norbert Ryu. You're not. These people end up not mattering, even though like their inventions like have and still are in some ways used today and throughout history. Um, um, so yeah, like Black secret technology ends up being this thing that I think multiplies and shifts and shapes and gets applied in different ways, and I'm trying to think about like how to play on those words or that phrase too, so you know thinking through alchemy and then thinking through like invention, um, and the series of drawings that we can get into later, were an outcome of thinking about those patents and inventions by those Black um, inventors, and me trying to build this archive that I felt didn't exist yet.
It's like diving off of that because you mentioned Norbert Relu. Is that how you say his name?
I've heard Ryu, um,
Ryu?
Ryu, but I could be wrong too.
It's French, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, didn't take French. We'll go with that. So how did you find out about his work and yeah, how does it relate to your recent or one of your works called Redox Strip?
Yeah. Um, so it relates to Redox Strip because for that project, I was trying to understand like what a distillation system was or what distillation is. The distillation like kind of study for me led me to Norbert Ryu, and his inventions and his story too, which is very complicated and at least I find it complicated, and layered in different types of way that I'm still trying to understand myself. And so like, through that research, like I see Ryu in that work as well. Like if Redox Strips could be understood as a stage, I'm trying to situate certain performers on that stage. Those being Norbert Ryu, DJ Screw, um, and Franz Fanon, and they all show up in more abstract or metaphorical ways. I like discovered Ryu through like researching like how to set up a distillation machine, um, or a distillation system, and that's specifically because um, Ryu's education and history is through these machines that he made that were at the time to resolve several issues that he saw on plantations that were making sugar or that were processing sugar. And before there was a system that has been called many different things. One was like the Jamaica train, it had some other names I can't think of right now, but basically ladling, boiling hot sugar water from one very hot pot to the next, and Ryu saw a lot of faults in that system, like people who were operating that system were getting injured. They were getting burned by the hot boiling sugar water. There was a lot of loss of product. Some of the sugar water, when it wasn't properly ladled from one pot to the next, like it would fall on the floor, so you lose money or value of some sort. And Ryu wanted to fix that, and he ends up making this evaporator vacuum pan. It is like one way it was called when he first invented it, but it was basically a distillation system. It was just like a system that replaced the worker, the people who were ladling the sugar, and designed it into a system that already had those pots embedded, and it was using a system of heat transference and evaporation to get like a more finer quality of the sugar that they were trying to process. But since he is still a Black man, and when he showed this to plantation owners, they rejected his offer to put it on the plantation to save money. And most of the time, what is said about this part of his history is that those plantation owners were afraid that the people operating the machines, the slaves that were operating the machines, would become radicalized. They would become smarter than them, and so there was a fear that that they would take over the plantation or something. They were afraid of that it was going to make them smarter than them, and then they would figure out how to run the operation. I don't know, but Ryu ends up getting a lot of pushback from these different plantation owners that he's trying to install this machine on. However, he goes elsewhere in the world and does have success installing those systems in Europe, I believe in Cuba as well. I think he has one installed in the States, if I'm correct. But that's it.
I had a question about redox drip, and what I found interesting was your use of lean, which is NyQuil and Sprite, correct?
My version is a very crude version of lean. A lot of people I think would say that it's not lean because it doesn't have codeine in it. I couldn't find codeine while I was still in grad school, so maybe I wasn't looking hard enough, but I was trying to get something like lean, to distill, and if, as you can see in this image, there's a lot of glass at the top, and the kind of glass that's round that has a black kind of stain on it. That's like Sprite and 7-Up and kind of NyQuil cough medicine and sleepy time medicine that I bought from CVS, and I've just been spinning it and heating it on that magnetic stirrer that also has a heating setting that it's sitting on top of. And so why did I use it? So this, like I said earlier, I see it as a stage, and this is one version of the work. I'll show another image where I kind of elaborated on some parts of it, and because it's modular, it's two stereos that are facing each other. There's a receiver and a mixer over on the left side, and the mixer is allowing you to hear sounds from different places. One of those places is from the glass that's in front of the stereos. At the bottom of the image, you see there's a microphone that's submerged in an iodine clock reaction that's already passed, so it looks clear. And what you hear is the turning of that water. I also in this iteration of the installation, I also had like a tape that I had recorded YouTube playlists that I was making at the time that had many different voices: Fortune Spillers, Franz Fanon, Sylvia Winter, a guy called Gerald, DJ Screw, music and interviews, and I think a few more lectures or talks that I had been just like archiving on YouTube, and I put it to tape. And so on another channel that was playing through the speakers as well.
Oh, cool.
And all this is very low because the speakers are facing each other. There's like a lot of feedback, so I have to put everything volume-wise and octave-wise like very low, so that there's not a lot of feedback. The lean is in part me trying to think through some things and ideas that DJ Screw said in some of his interviews, and why he was making the music that he was making at the time, which was like very, very, very like innovative by slowing down these records. And he speaks to this idea of like wanting to slow down life, which I don't see separate from the marriage of this this lean that was also happening in those scenes of like listening to that music, and which does have the effect of slowness, and so there's that aspect, and in some ways I see this as me trying to speak through Ryu to DJ Screw.
Wow.
By the process of like distillation and getting to the depth of that lean and of DJ Screw, and my relationship to DJ Screw growing up in Texas and for my high school and community college and undergrad, my friends and cousins would listen to Screwed Up Click and DJ Screw, Paul Wall, all these guys. I see him as a cultural producer that like has posthumously like become even more celebrated and famous, but that didn't not make me want to work through him or with him, because there are a lot of things about slowness that I'm still trying to understand too, and this kind of desire of slowness that I believe that he was thinking about as well.
Why was the distillation important?
I think because that story needed to be told, and that story still needs to be like unpacked about Ryu. Just his relationship with his own invention and even why it came into existence. And I think that's something that I'm also really interested in about inventions and themselves, is like the contextual histories that surround scientific objects or any type of tool or technology that comes into existence. Like, he saw a problem and he wanted to solve it, and his problem happened to be this system that was being performed by enslaved peoples. And in some ways he's like, in some ways I think about him, like when I was like doing my you know, when I was reading about him, I was like, well, is he kind of like a capitalist? Like, what is this? Like, what is this? What is he doing? You know, because he does like think like, yeah, let me make this process and this system more efficient for you. You know, remove the worker, um, and remove the operator, um, and I want to talk about those things and those ideas, and I want the work to point to it at least. How it points to it is not necessarily always so obvious. It's a bit abstracted, but and also I was just like, I want to make a distillation system, so that's another excuse just to make one. Is just because I want to understand that process, and it's also fun too. But yeah.
Yeah, it's like almost like you, by you creating it, it's kind of like you understanding the history a bit more. And then like how it relates to your life experiences. And like how it relates to DJ Screw. And then I guess it's like when I think of lean, I think of like Black people self-medicating themselves.
Yeah.
And thinking about like Black trauma as well. So that's kind of like what I get when I look at the piece as well. But I didn't know if that was intentional or if that's just like it's open to interpretation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just see a lot of like Black pain rooted in it, and like but not like necessarily like in a negative way, but just like kind of like in a reflective way. Especially since like lean is so it's so popular. Like, you know, it's like it's a part of pop culture right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when I hear, you know, when as I was watching those interviews by DJ Screw and knowing like, you know, how his death happened, and hearing him say like wanting to slow life down, yes, like, you know, it's not separate from like the culture that surrounds why he was making the music and how he was making the music. You know, so the ideas of wanting the idea of the desire for slowness, I think in itself like points to that.
To want to slow and numb the pain.
Yeah, to talk about and think about like pain and self-medication and how to get through, yeah, how to get through, how to just be and like think about, you know, slowing down that beingness, I think is not necessarily, I can't take full credit for like saying like, yes, that's what I was thinking about, but like, you know, I know that is a read and of the work, and yeah, you're one of a few people who have like also have that read of the work and the use of like the crude version of lean. Yeah, this is another iteration of how I've installed it, where I use an iPad that has a video of this engineer, this Black engineer that is, I believe, in Africa. This video went viral on Twitter, and he was showing how this like hand sanitizer, or not even hand sanitizer, sorry, soap dispenser that's in a bathroom at a design conference that he's located at, that will not detect his hand. So in the video, he's going back and forth and trying to put his hand in front of the soap dispenser and show the camera that there is no detection of my hand, the soap doesn't dispense. And then he uses a paper towel that's white, and it detects it, and it pours soap on the white paper towel. Yeah, I was kind of just, adding to adding to the work as I was like continuing my research or study. Um, and I think this kind of like, you know, pushed me into the direction of trying to understand like um, biases that happen in technologies that are invented by people.
Yeah, let's talk about the spirometer. What is the history of the spirometer, and how is white white supremacy embedded in the design and invention of spirometers?
Um, yeah, I mean, just for so I've used barometers because I'm asthmatic, and
Oh,
I've
okay.
been asthmatic since I was a kid. Um, and I didn't like that process because you basically blow into this tube, and you have to sustain a breath, and that like holds these sometimes these plastic balls that you see on this version of a spirometer. Sometimes it's digital, and it gives you an output of
Mm.
an expiration of breath, and it's measuring your lung capacity or the volume of air in your lungs. And
It's like kind of painful. I remember having to do it. Like,
it's almost like doing the reverse of holding your breath underwater or something like that.
yeah.
It's like you're pushing out breath, but you're trying to hold like that push for a long time. This machine, the Spirometer, has a history of racializing lung capacity. Um, More specifically in this country, early on, um, with this massive study that was put on by Benjamin Gould, um, who was by day an astronomer, but was commissioned to do this massive, uh, I guess, like, yeah, research of white soldiers, white sailors, prisoners, and black soldiers of the Union, and making tables of statistical data to indicate not just lung capacity, but also like measurements of the chest and measurements of the skull, um, kind of physical vitality. And at the time that Gould is doing this research, you also have several other physicians who are working in the world of the insurance companies, and
Mhm.
also in the world of like trying to understand and measure physical fitness and create a standard for vitality or fitness
Mhm.
fitness for for society, um, or the assessment, or use it as a tool of assessment to determine who is insured by insurance companies. So whose life is worth insuring, basically, is also being um, determined through these measurements. In Gould's project, where he is, using soldiers, black and white soldiers and sailors and prisoners, this study is taken up as fact. And in his study, I should say, it's he finds that, of course, those who are black have less volume or less capacity in their lungs. Um, but it's important to note that he does not go into detail of the living environmental conditions of these two different um, bodies are.
Right.
And so what is missing from his research is the fact that the way that those Black soldiers were living were overcrowded. The labor that the Black soldiers were doing were a lot more physically taxing.
Mm-hmm.
The well-being and the nutrition of these Black soldiers was not looked after for at all. And the access to any type of care or hospitals or medics was absolutely and for sure not nearly being close as accessible as those of the white soldiers. So what was happening is that cases of tuberculosis and cases of pneumonia were very much prevalent in those quarters of the Black soldiers. So what you have is you have these very healthy, very well taken care of white soldiers being in comparison to Black soldiers who didn't have the same type of conditions of living and work.
And it sounds like you're talking about 2020. You know,
Yeah. I mean, it's like not
what's
much.
different?
Yeah, not much has changed, and we have seen that with coronavirus, COVID-19. We've seen that same thing play out, and it's and you still have people saying things like "let the facts speak for themselves," like not pointing to any other social, environmental conditions being, thought about or, I mean, I think you have that now, and people are seeing that, but of course, but like, yeah, it is pretty much the same things that was happening back then, happening today too.
So I guess like what I want to ask, like after hearing you elaborate on the history of the spirometer, um, I guess I want to know like how do you see it informing your work, things that you're working on in like the near future?
Yeah. Yeah, the essay that that I worked on for this particular research, what remains is constant, is I think kind of maybe a small step into a larger project. I'm not too sure what that project looks like yet, but I think writing this piece and doing the research for this piece kind of allowed me to step in a new zone of the embeddedness of racism in science that has made the practice and the research open up a little bit more, and taking a closer look at how it's not just like science with a capital S that needs to be thoroughly examined, but it's also like who's funding it and how and why and when these inventions that are inherently racist come into existence, and then also kind of traveling back into the present and seeing like how new devices and new technologies are also being weaponized in the same way, and you still see it today with these kind of counter protesters to the Black Lives Matter protests that are happening. You have this new ideology that's like, oh, well, actually, there's been more white people who have been killed by cops than Black people. And I'm not too sure where that information actually came from, but I've heard several people say it online, and it's always prefaced with like, well, let's talk about statistics, let's talk about data, let's talk about facts. And I feel like that ideology and that rhetoric is like, you know, intertwined with the history of how, you know, the facts spoke for themselves in the 19th century and 18th century, when you have devices like the spirometer come into existence. And you can see throughout time and across time that statistics being accepted as a science or as like a system of truth, in a lot of ways, constructs differences. And there is no kind of fact checking on those numbers that it's producing, or there's and so what I'm saying is like, yes, like science and has been, you know, in some ways, a system of truth, but in a lot of ways it hasn't been objective, right? It's been completely biased, and I want to find those cracks where it's been biased and how it's continuing to being biased, and expose them, or talk about them or think about them.
Yeah, put them out there in the open and let's talk about it, you know? Well, I feel like that was my last question. So unless like you have any closing remarks.
No, I think that was like a pretty long and thoughtful conversation.
Yeah. So how can people like follow your work and keep up like in the meantime? Like your essay, is it public or it's not public yet?
The essay will be published as a e-publication that is tied to the Whitney's Museum's program, the Independent Studio program. So we'll have a website, and we'll also have a launch for that catalog. That's going to be a collection of works from the studio artists that were in the program this year for 2019 and 2020. There also will be some distribution of physical copies. We're still determining where they'll be located. They won't be for sale, though. They'll be accessible to all and free, and they're
Nice.
but we're still working out those details. And yeah, and my essay will be in that publication.
And when is that released?
I have to get back to you on that. I'm so
Okay.
I totally forgot, like off the top of my head. That's so bad. Dang
It's
it.
cool. It's cool.
I think we're still like trying to figure it out at the last second. But definitely around July, early July.
Oh, that's soon. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's around early July that everything is going to go to launch. Yeah, and outside of that, my website, philharrington.net, is where you can see more of the work.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So, and like, whenever you have like a more like set date for when that's going to release, you can just like let me know and I can share it, put it out there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's good talking with you, impacting all of this. I think it's very insightful for our community to know about this and to think about these topics and how it affects the present